Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. Usually, if I have any sort of background connection to a series, that's where I like to start. With this one we're going to jump right in, because Nanana's Buried Treasure is one of those shows that I'd never heard of, but when I did stumble across it, the summary really caught my attention. It was just very different from any other series I'd looked at in a while. Our story takes place on Nanai Island, which has an interesting backstory of its own. It's a man-made creation, brought to life by a group of students known as the Great Seven. The island is home to various schools and research institutions. The vision was to create a place where students could pursue their passions and find their life's adventure, and it's been a huge success overall. But our main protagonist, Jugo, doesn't have any particular passions or education goals. He arrives on Nanai Island in search of freedom after a falling out with his father, and things are going pretty well for him. He's managed to find a really cheap apartment and is all set to start his new life, only to discover that apartments tend to be cheap when they're haunted. At first, he thinks he just has the wrong place. The girl he finds inside doesn't look like a ghost, until she starts floating through objects and turning invisible. The landlady tells him that learning to coexist with her is just part of the deal. Oh, and there are no refunds on the deposit, by the way. Jugo's on a pretty tight budget, so he doesn't have much choice but to settle in and get to know his new roommate. The ghost girl is Nanana Ryugajo, and as long as you keep her supplied with pudding and don't mind that she stays up all night gaming, she's actually really easy to live with. She's upbeat and friendly, at least. This certainly isn't a horror show, despite the haunted by a ghost element. But most notably, she was a part of the Great Seven who created the island. We don't get a ton of detail on that group, but it's clear from the beginning that Nanana was the heart of the project. She was an avid adventurer herself, traveling the world to track down ancient artifacts with mystical powers. She had quite the collection by the end, and that collection likely had something to do with why she was murdered 10 years ago. She was stabbed from behind in this very apartment, binding her spirit to it, and her killer was never found. This collection, which contains some truly dangerous objects, sounded to me like the kind of thing you'd keep quiet, but if that was the intention, it must be the worst kept secret on the island, because Jugo can't go anywhere without running into someone who's hunting down her treasures. After her death, they were scattered around the island in various trap-laden ruins that are usually pretty dangerous themselves. Nanana's really into the game, though. She won't give hints, but if you manage to solve the puzzle and retrieve the treasure, she'll tell you all about its history and abilities. And though it frustrates Jugo a bit, she remains a neutral figure in this hunt at all times, regardless of who comes to her for information, and what their intentions might be. Which I found kinda respectable in a way. Two things really kick off this story. Jugo meets and befriends Tensai, a girl in his class who loudly proclaims she's going to be a master detective one day, and he also finds a notebook hidden in the apartment from one of Nanana's past roommates. It details out the rules of her afterlife here and her favorite puddings, basically a guide to make this coexistence a little easier, but it also ends with a note explaining that Nanana was her best friend and asking that whoever finds this guide try to help her pass on. They determine that the mystery of her killer is what's keeping her here, and there might be some hints in the collection, so Jugo and Tensai join the school's adventure club and start hunting treasures. This show had such a fun idea, and it was suitably fun to watch, even when things got a little serious. Two things that stood out right from the beginning were that I love the music in this show, and it looks great all around. There are two main points where the animation feels worth mentioning. This is a series where they mix in some magic, but there's a lot of regular old hand-to-hand combat too, and the fights were always fun to watch. They were choreographed well. The movement was really fluid. And I want to bring up the use of CG too. Generally, the rule is that CG is at its best when it's weaved in so well with the regular animation that it's not really noticeable, but this show was an exception. Whenever they enter a puzzle, there are these CG sequences used to build the ruins. It's very noticeable and different from what the show usually looks like, but it didn't take me out of the experience. If anything, it did a good job of hyping up what was about to come. I didn't bring it up when I reviewed Gare Zero, but that's the series I started comparing it to. In Gare Zero, they used CG for a lot of the monsters, and it looked pretty bad. They just didn't blend well with the rest of the scene, but it worked here. A1 Pictures has a pretty good reputation as far as anime studios go. I honestly don't pay as much attention to that sort of thing as I probably should, but this was one of those shows that made me want to look for that information, just to know. Visually, I'd say Nanana's Buried Treasure is another point in this studio's favor. I've been pretty good lately about separating the spoilers out of my reviews. There are all sorts of specific things I want to get into this time, but it wouldn't feel right to leave my spoiler-free viewers without a bit of a warning. Nanana's Buried Treasure is a very fun show. It does a lot of things well, and almost all the characters were at least interesting, if not likable. I was fond of the whole main crew, I'll give you that. But the mystery is not its strongest point. There is a whole adventure to be had over these 11 episodes, but it's not the one that results in finding the killer. And I can't pretend that's not disappointing, but I do think what the show does give you is worth watching. And now, I will get into my more in-depth thoughts on the ending. But first, there are some characters I want to talk about in more detail, and now you can be warned for spoilers. Tensai is probably the simplest one. She turned out to be the real MVP of this team. The kind of characters who are usually that in-your-face about their big dreams and how successful they're going to be. Well, I kind of expected her to be a bit of a bumbling idiot in practice, but she does actually have the skills to back up her words. She impressed me with her detective work again and again. I could see how someone else might still find her a little annoying, but I never got tired of watching her swoop in and save the day. Jugo turned out to be a lot more complicated than I'd expected. Anime is kind of overrun with super bland main protagonists who basically exist just for the audience to project themselves onto, and I noted right away that Jugo wasn't like that. When a character has a sense of purpose and a real personality, that's something you can just feel. Jugo didn't exist solely because the creators needed something to kickstart a story that would ultimately be driven by a more interesting supporting cast. He could have had his own tale even if he hadn't moved into Nanana's apartment, and I almost wish we'd gotten to see that tale. Jugo joins the adventure club and they get through the first ruins, only for the club president to turn on them and take the treasure for himself. Jugo and Tensai catch up with him to take it back, and everything was playing out the way you'd expect it to. But then, in the middle of their showdown, Jugo starts mocking Ishin, the club president, for having dreams, telling him it's just embarrassing to go around talking about grand dreams, like using the collection to become all-powerful. And I mean, Jugo had never been this happy-go-lucky ball of optimism and sunshine, but this tipped the scale in such a cynical direction. It was a philosophy you'd more expect from a villain, not your main protagonist. Mentally, I had to take a step back and ask myself, is this really the hero I'm rooting for? It's complicated, though. Jugo's not really a bad guy. You can tell he once had hopes and dreams himself and is only so beaten down now because something caused him to lose faith in those things. But unfortunately, the anime doesn't go into what that something was. We learn he actually comes from a family of thieves, working under a Robin Hood-type code, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. That was the main point he clashed over with his father, but that's not fully explored either. It's unfortunate, but there's a lot of that with this show. The anime was adapted from a light novel series, but only the first 3 volumes. It's only the first act of the story, and it's not really centered on Nanana or Jugo or even Tensai yet. When I reached the final episode, I was struck by the feeling that this first arc actually felt like it was meant to be Isshin Yuiga's story. The club president isn't really a bad guy either. They make up and reconnect after that first conflict. He just got a bit carried away after finding a specific treasure he'd been after for a long time, and we spend pretty much the rest of the series exploring why. Kasumi Kanjo was the first Adventure Club president, and one of Nanana's past roommates, the one who left the note asking the next tenant to help her best friend. When she ran the place, the Adventure Club was thriving, and more about having fun than benefiting from the treasures, and Isshin really admired her. But when she graduated, the presidency was passed down to Hio Ikusaba, who only cared about coming out on top in the end. To Ikusaba, the treasure hunt was a game, and all that mattered was winning. He ran the club into the ground, not caring when people got hurt in the ruins because he pushed them too hard. Slowly they all quit, and Ikusaba took off with their treasures, leaving only Isshin left to try and rebuild. But he did rebuild, and is committed to restoring the club to its former glory. Ikusaba returns to be the real villain of this first arc, and it was great to see Isshin finally overcome him, even if it did technically end in a stalemate. I got really into his story by the end. I can't say it's not disappointing when I look at what this series could have been. Yes, I would have preferred if the one arc the anime covers was the one that solved the murder mystery, and addressed whether Nanana even wanted to move on, which was in question by the end. But I'm honestly a little torn, because I did really enjoy the story we did get. What I'm most disappointed about is that the series apparently didn't do too well in Japan, so there's no hope of a continuation. I would definitely be up for reading the source material, but I haven't gone looking for it yet. I'm kind of gearing up for another disappointment when I do, because light novels don't get translated nearly as often as manga, but I don't regret watching the anime. If you don't mind being left hanging a bit, I definitely suggest it. Thank you for watching.